What happens when the perfect life is built on a foundation of lies? For Era Croft. 7 months pregnant and married to millionaire mogul Julian Croft. Her gilded cage was about to shatter. She had the penthouse, the private jets, the life every woman supposedly dreamed of. But late-night meetings, whispered phone calls, and the scent of unfamiliar perfume told a different story. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was uncovering a betrayal so deep it threatened to destroy everything. This isn't just a story of an affair. It's a story of a woman who refused to be a victim and orchestrated a takedown so public, so devastating that no one in that Michelin-starred restaurant would ever forget it. The penthouse apartment on Park Avenue was a monument to success. A silent testament to Julian Croft's Midas touch. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off glass sculptures and illuminating the minimalist, museum-like space. From this vantage point, New York City sprawled below. A toy set for the gods. And Era Croft, 7 months pregnant with their first child, was its queen. On paper, her life was an envy-inducing fantasy. Julian, with his sharp suits, sharper mind, and a smile that could disarm world leaders, was the founder of Croft Equity, a private equity firm that had devoured competitors with breathtaking speed. He was the darling of the financial press, a modern titan. Era, a former art curator with a quiet grace that contrasted with her husband's explosive ambition, was the perfect complement. They were the city's golden couple. But for weeks, the gold had felt like cheap plating. The silence in the sprawling apartment had grown heavy, punctuated only by the distant wail of sirens from the streets below. Julian, once a doting husband who would trace patterns on her burgeoning belly and whisper plans for their son, had become a ghost in their home. It started subtly. Late-night deal. Darling. He'd text. The word sterile and impersonal. Board meeting ran over. He'd come home long after she'd fallen asleep. The scent of expensive whiskey and something else, a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his clothes. He'd slip into the guest room, claiming he didn't want to wake her. The first time, she felt a pang of gratitude. The fifth, a spike of cold dread. The emotional distance was a chasm opening between them. Their conversations, once filled with shared jokes and future dreams, became transactional. How was your day? He'd ask, his eyes already on his phone, scrolling through market reports. He no longer asked about the baby, about the nursery she was meticulously designing in shades of cream and soft green, or about the kicks that were becoming stronger every day. It was as if the child, his child, was an abstraction he couldn't afford to consider. One Tuesday evening, the dread solidified into something harder. Something she could no longer ignore. Era was arranging a bouquet of white peonies when Julian's phone, left carelessly on the marble kitchen island, buzzed. It was a new habit of his, leaving his second phone, his work phone, at home while he took his personal one out. A message glowed on the screen. It wasn't from a business associate. Chloe, last night was electric. I can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait for Ethelgard's. My dress is going to knock you off your feet. Era's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic drumbeat against the steady, rhythmic kicks of her baby. Chloe. The name was a foreign object, sharp and painful. Ethelgard's table. She knew the name. It was the city's most exclusive restaurant. A place where reservations were a myth. And getting a table meant you were someone truly powerful. Julian had tried to book it for their anniversary last year and failed. Her hands trembled as she placed the peonies in the vase. A single drop of water falling onto the polished marble like a tear. The room, once a symbol of their shared success, suddenly felt like a cage. A beautiful, exquisitely furnished cage where she had been left to nurture his heir while he built a new life with someone named Chloe. The lie was no longer a suspicion. It had a name. It had a date at a restaurant she couldn't get into. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. For a moment, she leaned against the cold island, one hand protectively on her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the marble as if to keep from collapsing. The city lights began to twinkle outside, indifferent to the implosion of her world. The man she loved, the man whose child she carried, was a stranger. And the queen in the Park Avenue castle was nothing more than a fool. The initial shock gave way to a cold, razor-sharp fury. The tears she shed that first night were not of sorrow, but of rage. They were cleansing, washing away the naive trust, leaving behind a grim determination. Era Croft was not a woman to crumble. She was a curator. She knew how to research, how to find the story behind the artifice. And Julian's life, she realized, was a masterpiece of deception. She didn't confront him. A screaming match would accomplish nothing. It would give him the opportunity to lie, to gaslight her, to twist her pregnancy hormones into a weapon against her. No. She needed evidence. She needed undeniable, irrefutable proof that would strip him of all his defenses. Her first step was to hire a private investigator. She didn't want a slick corporate firm. She wanted someone old school. Someone discreet and relentless. A friend from her art world days, who had gone through a similarly brutal divorce. Gave her a name, Marcus Thorne. Thorne's office was the antithesis of her own world. It was a cramped, dusty space above a bakery in Queens, smelling faintly of stale coffee and cinnamon. Thorne himself was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite. He was in his late 50s with a weary face, a cheap suit, and eyes that had seen every flavor of human betrayal. He listened to her story without interruption, his expression unreadable. "You're sure you want to pull this thread, Mrs. Croft?" he asked when she finished, his voice a low rumble. "Once you start, it doesn't stop unraveling." "I'm sure," Era said, her voice steady. "I want to know everything. Who she is, where they go, what he's spending on her. Everything." She transferred a substantial retainer from a private account her father had set up for her years ago. It was her run for the hills fund. He'd joked. She never thought she'd use it. Thorne was brutally efficient. Within 48 hours, the first email arrived. It contained a single attachment, a dossier on Chloe Vance. Era's hands shook as she opened it. The woman on the screen was young, probably mid-20s, with a cascade of blonde hair and the bright, hungry look of someone who knew her beauty was a currency. She was a brand ambassador and social media influencer. Her Instagram profile a curated feed of luxury travel, designer clothes, and sponsored posts. She was everything Era was not: loud, public, and overtly transactional. The report detailed their affair with chilling precision. They met at a charity gala 3 months prior. Julian had become one of her primary benefactors. Thorne's report included credit card statements from a black card under a corporate LLC she'd never heard of. There were charges for a subleased apartment in Soho. Thousands of dollars at Cartier, Chanel, and Hermès. There was a weekend trip to St. Bart's, booked under the LLC's name. Each purchase was a fresh stab of betrayal. He had told her they needed to be fiscally prudent this quarter. That a big acquisition was pending. He had vetoed her choice of an expensive handcrafted crib, calling it an unnecessary extravagance. Meanwhile, he was funding a complete stranger's life of luxury. The worst part was the timeline. The affair had started just weeks after their second IVF treatment had finally succeeded. The joy she had felt, the relief that had washed over them, had been a lie. While she was attending her first ultrasound, marveling at the tiny, fluttering heartbeat that was their son, Julian was likely in bed with Chloe Vance. Thorne's next update was a series of photographs. They were grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Julian and Chloe laughing as they left a downtown bar. Julian, his hand on the small of her back, guiding her into a taxi. And the final one, a clear shot of them kissing under the awning of the Soho apartment building. A passionate, desperate kiss that looked nothing like the chaste pecks he gave her anymore. Era stared at the photo, her vision blurring. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the look on his face. He looked alive, energized, free. He hadn't looked at her that way in years. She printed the photo, the ink still wet, and placed it on the cold marble of her kitchen island. It was her anchor in the storm of her emotions. It was her reminder of what was at stake, and of the justice she intended to exact. The unraveling had begun, and she would not stop until every single thread of his duplicitous life was pulled bare for the world to see. To understand the enemy, Era knew she had to understand Chloe Vance. Marcus Thorne's dossier was a skeleton. Era wanted its soul. She spent hours delving into the digital ghost of Chloe's life, her fingers flying across the keyboard in the dead of night while Julian slept soundly in the guest room, oblivious. Chloe's Instagram was a masterclass in calculated fantasy. Every photo was an advertisement for a life of effortless glamour. Here she was sipping champagne on a yacht in Monaco, tagging the luxury rental company. Here she was unboxing a gifted designer handbag, her nails perfectly manicured. She had over 500,000 followers who lapped up her content, leaving fawning comments like, "Goals," and "You're living the dream." But Era, the former art curator, saw the composition. She saw the desperation behind the perfect lighting. Chloe wasn't just enjoying these things. She was performing. Her smile in almost every shot didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a tension in her posture, the subtle strain of someone constantly posing, constantly aware of the camera. Era went deeper, past the sponsored posts and into the archives. Before the blonde hair and designer clothes, Chloe Vance from Scranton, Pennsylvania, had been a brunette with a rounder face and a far more genuine smile. Her old posts were about college exams, part-time jobs at diners, and dreams of being a designer. She had a small Etsy shop where she sold her own jewelry, delicate, intricate pieces that showed a raw talent. The shop had been inactive for 2 years, The transformation was stark. Around the time the Etsy shop went dormant, the photos changed. She moved to New York. The brunette hair became bottle blonde. The genuine smiles were replaced by a practiced pout. The girl from Scranton had been packaged and sold. And her biggest customer was now Julian Croft. Era felt a flicker of something she didn't expect, a faint, bitter pity. Chloe wasn't a femme fatale. A cunning homewrecker. She was a product of a culture that told young women their value was in their youth, their beauty, and the men they could attract. She had traded her authenticity for access, her talent for trinkets. Julian hadn't just seduced her. He had bought her, transforming her into an accessory that suited his new, extravagant narrative. Marcus Thorne's final report landed in her inbox a week before the planned dinner at Ethelgard's table. It contained the real bombshell. The piece of information that changed the entire game. The Soho apartment. Thorne wrote, his tone dry and factual even in text, is leased by a shell corporation named Vance Holdings. The sole director of this corporation is Chloe Vance. The funding for the lease, however, and a seed investment of $2 million into the corporation's account, came from an offshore transfer. The transfer originated from a Cayman Islands account owned by Croft Equity Global, an international subsidiary of your husband's company. Era read the paragraph 3 times. This wasn't just an affair. A man like Julian didn't gift his mistress a $2 million seed fund and a corporate identity out of love. This was a business transaction. He wasn't just keeping a mistress. He was investing in her. Why? The question gnawed at her. She thought back to Julian's recent behavior. His stress. His obsession with his phone. His constant talk of a make-or-break acquisition. It all started to click into place. Julian wasn't just cheating. He was hiding something far bigger. The affair. The lavish spending, it was all a distraction. A glittering facade to mask a deeper rot. Chloe Vance wasn't the co-conspirator. She was just another pawn in Julian's high-stakes game, a beautifully dressed, easily manipulated pawn. The pity Era had felt for Chloe curdled. Pawn or not, she had made her choice. She had gleefully accepted the blood money, the price of another woman's happiness. She had traded her soul for a Soho apartment and Cartier bracelets. Era's resolve hardened. When she walked into Ethelgard's table, she wouldn't just be confronting her husband's mistress. She would be exposing a fraud. And Chloe Vance would be the collateral damage. The day of the reservation at Ethelgard's table arrived with an unnerving calm. The sky over Manhattan was a brilliant, cloudless blue. For Era, it felt like the deep breath before a plunge into icy water. Her sister, Serena, arrived at the penthouse that afternoon. Serena was the opposite of Era in almost every way, fiery, impulsive, and fiercely protective. She had been Era's rock since the first tearful phone call. Now, she walked in carrying a garment bag and a leather tote filled with what she called her war kit. All right. Let's see the battlefield, Serena said, her eyes sweeping over the pristine apartment. Has the target said anything? He's in a critical dinner meeting with investors, Era said, her voice laced with irony. He told me not to wait up. The absolute audacity, Serena muttered, unzipping the garment bag to reveal a stunning deep crimson dress. It was simple, elegant, and powerful. You will wear this. No morning colors. Tonight. You are not the victim. You are the reckoning. Era had spent the week meticulously planning every detail of the confrontation. A private blow-up was what Julian would expect. It was what he could control, manipulate, and ultimately dismiss. Public humiliation was a language he understood far better. His entire identity was built on his public image, on the perception of power and control. She was going to burn that image to the ground. Her plan was simple yet brutal. Phase 1, the entrance. They would arrive at Ethelgard's table at 8:30 p.m. Half an hour after Julian and Chloe's reservation. They would walk in. Not as aggressors, but as if they belonged there. Confident and serene. Phase 2, the revelation. Era had booked a table for two under her maiden name. A table she had secured not through influence, but through a carefully worded email to the manager explaining a special anniversary surprise and a generous, discretionary fee. The table was strategically positioned to have a clear view of Julian's. She would let them see her. She would let the confusion and panic marinate. Phase 3, the detonation. This was the most critical part. She wouldn't scream or cry. She would walk over to their table, calm and composed. She had prepared a small, elegant gift box. Inside was not a piece of jewelry or a sentimental trinket. Inside was the glossy 8x10 photograph of Julian and Chloe kissing outside the Soho apartment. And beneath it, a copy of the incorporation document for Vance Holdings, showing Chloe as the director, and the bank statement showing the $2 million transfer from Croft Equity Global. I need you to be my witness, Era told Serena, her voice low but firm. And I need you to film it. Not obviously. Just your phone on the table. But I want a record of his face when his world comes crashing down. Serena squeezed her hand, her own eyes alight with a fierce fire. I'll get every last second. High definition. As Era got ready, she looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The crimson dress clung to her curves, accentuating her pregnant belly. It was her armor. She was no longer just Era Croft, the millionaire's wife. She was a mother protecting her child's future. She was a woman reclaiming her power. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the strong, reassuring kick of her son. It's just us now, little one, she whispered to her reflection. And we are going to be fine. The penthouse, once her gilded cage, now felt like a launch pad. She was about to step out of the shadows and into the fire. Not to be consumed by it, but to control it. The quiet, graceful curator was gone. The woman who walked out of that apartment with her sister by her side was an avenging angel in a crimson dress, ready for war. Ethelgard's table was less a restaurant and more a hushed cathedral of modern gastronomy. The lighting was low and intimate, casting a golden glow on the room's minimalist decor. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of the city's elite, hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, and old money scions. The clinking of cutlery on porcelain was the only percussion in a symphony of whispered power plays and discreet negotiations. Julian and Chloe were seated at one of the best tables in the house. A plush corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. Julian, looking relaxed and triumphant in a bespoke navy suit, was holding court, a glass of vintage Bordeaux in his hand. Chloe, seated opposite him, was breathtaking in a glittering silver gown that seemed poured onto her body. She was laughing, Her head thrown back, radiating the triumphant glow of a woman who believes she has won the ultimate prize. At precisely 8:30 p.m., the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. Era and Serena entered. The room didn't fall silent, but a subtle shift occurred. Heads turned. Conversations faltered for a half-second. Era, in her striking crimson dress, her pregnancy a bold statement of life and continuity, was a vision of regal composure. She moved with an unhurried grace, her gaze sweeping the room as if she owned it. Serena, a step behind her, was her shadow, her phone held loosely in her hand. Already recording. Julian saw her first. His smile froze on his face. The glass of wine stopped halfway to his lips. His blood drained from his face, leaving him with a pasty, sickly pallor. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk into his board meeting. Chloe's laughter died in her throat as she followed his gaze. Her face, a moment ago so full of joy, contorted into a mask of confusion. Then dawning horror. She recognized Era from the society pages, from the background of Julian's life. The pregnant belly was an irrefutable fact. A cannonball aimed directly at her fantasy. The maitre d' hurried over to Era. "Mrs. Croft. Your table is this way." He led them to their reserved spot a few tables away, but in direct line of sight of the corner booth. Era didn't look at Julian. She didn't acknowledge his existence. She sat down, unfolded her napkin, and began to peruse the menu. Her expression one of serene indifference. This, she knew, was the cruelest part of the torture, the waiting. She could feel his eyes on her, burning with a desperate, panicked energy. He was trapped. To make a scene would be to admit guilt in front of this powerful audience. To do nothing was to let the poison seep into the air. For 15 agonizing minutes, they sat in a silent stalemate. Julian and Chloe's conversation had ceased entirely. Chloe kept stealing panicked glances at Era, her bravado crumbling with every passing second. Julian was furiously texting under the table, presumably to Era, but she had already blocked his number. Finally, Era knew it was time. She picked up the small, elegantly wrapped gift box from the table. She gave Serena a slight nod. Serena adjusted her phone, ensuring a clear view. Era rose and walked toward their booth. Every eye in the restaurant was now on her. The quiet hum of conversation died away completely. There was only the sound of her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She stopped at their table. Julian looked up at her, his face a mess of sweat and fear. Chloe shrank back into the plush leather of the booth, looking like a trapped animal. "Julian. Darling," Era said, her voice clear and calm, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your investors' meeting." She placed the gift box on the table, right next to Chloe's champagne flute. "I believe you left this at our home. I thought your colleague might want to have it." Chloe stared at the box as if it were a bomb. Her hands trembled. "What is this?" "Era?" Julian hissed, his voice low and threatening. "Open it," Era said, her gaze now fixed on Chloe. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. With fumbling fingers, Chloe slowly untied the silk ribbon and lifted the lid. Her eyes fell on the photograph. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly white that clashed with her glittering dress. Her eyes darted from the photo of her and Julian kissing to the pregnant woman standing before her. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. "But there's more," Era said sweetly, her voice dripping with ice. "A little welcome to the business gift. From one woman in Julian's life to another." Chloe's trembling hand reached back into the box. She pulled out the bank statement and the incorporation document. She scanned the pages, her eyes widening in confusion and then utter devastation. She looked at Julian, her expression pleading, desperate for an explanation. "Julian. What is this?" "Vance Holdings. $2 million. What is this?" Julian was speechless. He was trapped. Exposed. His carefully constructed worlds colliding in the most public and humiliating way possible. Era leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "He didn't tell you. That isn't a gift, sweetie. It's a severance package. You see, Croft equity is sinking. It's a house of cards. And he's been using company funds illegally. I might add to hide his assets before the whole thing collapses. You weren't his mistress. You were his offshore account. A very pretty, very naive, and very disposable offshore account." Tears began to stream down Chloe's face, black mascara tracks marking her pale cheeks. The dream dissolved into a nightmare. The love, the future, the luxuriate was all a lie. She wasn't his queen. She was his patsy. A sob broke from her lips, loud and raw in the silent restaurant. Era stood up straight, her work done. She gave Julian one last, withering look. "I'll see you in court, Julian. All of my lawyers will see all of you." Then, without a backward glance, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her head held high. Serena followed, her phone having captured every devastating moment. As the heavy oak doors closed behind them, the silence in Ethelgard's table was finally broken by the sound of Chloe Vance's heartbroken, humiliated sobs. The internet moves faster than a wildfire, and Serena's video was gasoline. By the time Era had settled into the plush leather seat of the car speeding away from Ethelgard's table, the first grainy clips were already appearing on Twitter, uploaded by other diners who had captured the drama on their own phones. But Serena's footage was the masterpiece. It was clear, steady, and devastatingly intimate. She had captured every flicker of panic in Julian's eyes, every crumbling facade of Chloe's confidence, and every ounce of Era's icy, regal composure. Anonymously, Serena sent the full video to the city's most voracious gossip columnist, a woman known only as Gotham's Gaze, with the simple subject line, "Ethelgard's final course, just desserts." Within an hour, it was a global phenomenon. Croft collapse was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The video was sliced, diced, and memed. Financial news outlets, initially hesitant to touch a domestic dispute, were forced to cover it when their own viewers started spamming their comment sections. The story was too perfect to ignore, the beautiful, pregnant wife in the crimson dress, a symbol of righteous fury, The titan of industry exposed as a common cheat. And the weeping mistress. A modern-day Icarus whose wax wings had melted under the bright lights of public scrutiny. For Julian, the fallout was a descent into a special kind of hell. He had stumbled out of the restaurant, leaving a sobbing Chloe in the booth, and was immediately swarmed by paparazzi who seemed to materialize from the shadows. The flashbulbs were like machine gun fire. He arrived back at the penthouse there, Pentecito, find it empty and silent, save for the incessant buzzing of his phone. Every call was a fresh nightmare. His chairman of the board, a man whose family had been powerful for generations, was apoplectic. What have you done, Julian? You've made us a laughingstock. The brand is toxic overnight. His PR chief was in meltdown mode. I can't spin this, Julian. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a drink. She was calm. People believe her. His attempts at damage control were pathetic. He drafted a press release full of corporate jargon about a private matter and a period of emotional distress for my wife. But it was like trying to put out a volcano with a water pistol. He tried to paint Era as unhinged. But the video showed the opposite. She was media in couture. And the public was enthralled. The final nail in the coffin came when the board of the major tech firm he was trying to acquire called an emergency meeting. The deal wasn't just on hold. It was dead. The official statement cited concerns about his erratic personal behavior and questionable professional judgment. The empire he had built on perception and intimidation began to liquidate before his very eyes. Chloe Vance's downfall was swifter and even more brutal. She had fled the restaurant in a haze of tears and shame, only to find her own apartment building surrounded. The digital world that had worshipped her turned on her with feral glee. Her Instagram comments became a cesspool of vitriol. Homewrecker, gold digger, and far worse were the kindest of the terms used. The luxury brands that had paid her thousands for a single post issued statements severing all ties. Her agent stopped taking her calls. She tried to access the Vance Holdings bank account, the $2 million that was supposed to be her security. Her future. A stark red, account frozen, message stared back at her. Julian, the man she thought loved her, had cut her off without a word. She was trapped in the gilded cage he had built for her with no money, no friends, and a face that was now synonymous with public humiliation. The girl from Scranton was truly, utterly alone. In stark contrast, Era found sanctuary. Serena drove her straight to their parents' sprawling estate in the rolling hills of Connecticut. Stepping out of the car, the scent of damp earth and old trees replacing the city's exhaust fumes, Era felt like she could finally breathe. The rage and adrenaline of the confrontation gave way to a profound, bone-deep weariness. She slept for 12 straight hours. When she awoke, the world had changed. But inside the stone walls of her childhood home, she was insulated. Serena became her Praetorian guard, screening calls, deleting hateful messages, and curating the news so she only saw what was necessary. Her parents, a quiet, formidable couple, enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love, never once saying, "I told you so." Though they had never trusted Julian. Days turned into a week. Era walked the gardens, her hands resting on her belly, speaking quietly to the sun who was now her entire world. The fury had cooled, crystallizing into something harder, colder, resolve. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. She held the keys to Julian's destruction. And she intended to use them. The call came on a crisp Tuesday morning. The caller ID was blocked. Serena answered. Her voice guarded. After a moment, she held the phone out to Era. It's a man named David Chen. She whispered. From the SEC. Era took the phone. Her heart giving a steady, powerful beat. This was it. The next phase. Mrs. Croft. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and serious. My name is David Chen. I'm a senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I imagine you're receiving a lot of calls. But I assure you, this is not about the gossip pages. There was a pause. We saw the video. And frankly, your husband has been on our radar for some time. We've suspected accounting irregularities at Croft Equity for the better part of a year. But we've lacked a direct through line. A thread to pull to unravel the whole thing. Your very public allegation about the illegal transfer of funds to that shell corporation. That might just be the thread we need. We believe you may be in possession of information that could be critical to a federal investigation. A surge of vindication. Pure and powerful. Washed over Era. It wasn't just her pain. It wasn't just a sordid affair. It was real. It was a crime. Her personal battle was about to become a federal case. Mrs. Croft. Are you there? Era took a deep breath. Her gaze falling on the photograph of Julian and Chloe, which she had brought with her. It was her reminder. Yes. Mr. Chen. I'm here. She said. Her voice clear and strong. Without a trace of hesitation. I have documents. Bank statements. Incorporation papers. Timelines. I have everything. And I will give you all of it. She hadn't just exposed an affair. She had ignited a pyre. The little gift box she had placed on that table at Ethelgard's wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the spark that would burn Julian Croft's corrupt world to the ground. And she would be the one to fan the flames. The deposition room in Anna Sharma's law firm was a theater of war disguised as a boardroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and simmering animosity. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Julian's legal team. A trio of belligerent, pinstriped men who radiated an unearned confidence. On the other side sat Era. A study in calm defiance. With her lawyer, Anna. And a senior attorney from the SEC, David Chen. At the head of the table sat Arthur Kendrick, Julian's former CFO. He was a man drowning in his own sweat. A cheap suit clinging to his trembling frame. He had been granted immunity. But he looked like a man heading to his own execution. 4 hours. He had walked them through the labyrinth of financial fraud. His voice a nervous monotone as he detailed the shell corporations and cooked books. Era listened. Her hands clasped over her burgeoning belly. Feeling a grim satisfaction. This was the proof she had sought. The validation of her suspicions. But then Anna, sensing a vulnerability, shifted her line of questioning. She projected a ledger onto the screen. Mr. Kendrick. Let's talk about the payments to Vance Holdings. They're coded differently from the other slush funds. Why is that? Kendrick flinched. He licked his dry lips. Mr. Croft called them priority legacy payments. He was very specific about them. Legacy payments? Anna pressed, her voice like a scalpel. That seems a rather grandiose term for funding a mistress's lifestyle. Let's follow the money. Shall we? She clicked a key. And a new diagram appeared on the screen, a series of wire transfers branching off from the Vance Holdings account. A significant portion of this money didn't go to Cartier or a Soho landlord. It went here. She pointed to a name on the screen. Clinic Schiller. Zurich, Switzerland. A private medical facility. Why was Croft Equity sending millions of dollars to a Swiss clinic? Mr. Kendrick. The room went completely still. Era's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the name. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than anything she had felt before creeping into her veins. Kendrick's face crumpled. It was for a child. He stammered, refusing to make eye contact. MS. Vance was the intended mother. They had engaged a surrogate. A sharp pain shot through Era's chest. Another child. So, this wasn't just an affair. It was a parallel life. While she was joyfully preparing a nursery, he was funding another one in secret with another woman. The cruelty was breathtaking. Anna placed a steadying hand on her arm. A silent signal to stay calm. But Anna wasn't finished. Her eyes were blazing. A surrogate. That's an expensive undertaking. But it still doesn't explain the deception with your client's wife. Mrs. Croft. Anna said, her voice softening as she turned to Era. Then hardening as she faced Kendrick again. Also underwent fertility treatments. Why put his wife through the pain and expense of IVF if he was already having a child with his mistress? This was the question that shattered Arthur Kendrick's composure. He looked at Era. His eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pity. Because the IVF treatments. They weren't for his child. He whispered. The words tumbling out in a rush of confession. Mr. Croft couldn't have children. A case of mumps in his late teens. He was sterile. He knew it for years. The world did not tilt. It ceased to exist. The sounds of the room, the hum of the air conditioning. The distant city traffic faded into a deafening roar in Era's ears. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her hand, of its own accord, flew to her stomach. To the precious life kicking within her. Sterile. The word echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of her mind. It was a bomb that vaporized her past, rewriting every memory with a horrific new script. Their struggle to conceive. The years of disappointment. The countless doctor's appointments, all a charade. His feigned sadness with each negative test. His supposed joy when the IVF finally worked. A slideshow of horrors flickered behind her eyes, Julian holding her hand in the clinic. His face a mask of loving concern. Julian tenderly administering the hormone injections that left her bruised and exhausted. Julian celebrating their miracle pregnancy with a bottle of champagne he couldn't wait to open. Every single moment had been a performance. A lie of such monstrous proportions that she couldn't comprehend it. The man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, was a sociopath. The baby inside her gave a sudden, powerful kick, as if sensing her distress. And in that moment, something inside Era shifted. The shock and the horror were consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. This child, her child, was not the fruit of their shared love. He was the product of her hope and a stranger's DNA. He was hers alone. He was untainted by the monster who had orchestrated this puppet show. Anna's voice cut through the fog. Sharp and grounding. So let me be perfectly clear. Mr. Kendrick. For the board. For the public. Julian Croft created a decoy family with his wife. Using a sperm donor. All to maintain the facade of a stable family man while his company was imploding. And simultaneously, he was using stolen company funds to create what he considered his real era secret child with his mistress who would be born with a clean name and a hidden fortune. Far from the disgrace he knew was coming. Yes. Kendrick croaked. That was the plan. Era slowly stood up. Her chair scraping against the polished floor. The room swam back into focus. She saw the stunned faces of the SEC lawyers. She saw the panicked, defeated expressions on the faces of Julian's attorneys. They knew, in that instant, that their case was lost. This went beyond financial crimes. This was a story of human depravity that no jury would ever forgive. She walked to the large window overlooking the city. Her back to the room. She stared at the skyline. A panorama of ambition and power. And saw only a monument to her own naivety. The betrayal was so absolute. So meticulously crafted. It was almost a work of art, a masterpiece of cruelty. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had hollowed out her soul and tried to build a monument to himself inside it. A single tear, hot with fury, escaped her eye and traced a path down her cold cheek. He had underestimated her. He had seen her quiet grace as weakness. He had mistaken her love for foolishness. He had not broken her. He had just shown her exactly what she was fighting against. She turned back to the room. Her spine straight. Her eyes clear and as hard as diamonds. The soft, gentle Era Croft was gone forever. Burned away in the fire of this revelation. In her place stood a queen. A mother. An avenger. Her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. It was low, controlled, and filled with the chilling promise of annihilation. I want him to have nothing, she said. Her gaze sweeping over every person in the room until it landed on the empty chair where Julian would one day sit in a court of law. When this is over, I want him to have nothing left but his name. And I want that name to be synonymous with failure and shame for the rest of his miserable life. The war was no longer about a broken heart or stolen money. It was about eradicating a legacy of poison and protecting the pure, innocent life that was hers and hers alone. The trial of Julian Croft was the financial world's Super Bowl, and its public execution rolled into one. The media circus camped outside the courthouse captured a daily parade of somber suits and grim faces. But inside, the atmosphere was one of cold, clinical dissection. Era sat in the front row every day. A silent, statuesque presence. She was no longer just the wronged wife. She was the architect of this reckoning. She watched as Anna Sharma, her ferocious lawyer, and David Chen of the SEC laid the fraudulent empire of Croft equity bare. They presented a mountain of evidence, labyrinthine charts of offshore accounts, damning testimony from a parade of former employees, and the star witness, a terrified Arthur Kendrick, who detailed Julian's schemes with devastating precision. The day Era took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. She wore a simple navy dress, her demeanor one of unshakable composure. She did not speak of heartache or betrayal. She spoke of facts. She detailed the discovery of the shell corporations, the credit card statements, the timeline of deceit that corresponded perfectly with the company's hidden losses. She presented her evidence with the cool, methodical precision of the art curator she once was, authenticating the narrative of his downfall piece by piece. When the prosecutor asked her why she had done it, her answer was clear and rang with authority. Because his crimes were not just against the market, she said, her eyes finding Julian's for a fleeting second. They were against my family. And I will always protect my family. Julian, who had begun the trial with an air of arrogant defiance, seemed to shrink in his chair with each passing day. The testimony chipped away at his facade until nothing was left but a pale, twitching man who could not meet his wife's gaze. When the jury returned, the verdict was swift. On the charge of wire fraud, we the jury find the defendant, Julian Croft, guilty. The word guilty echoed through the chamber again and again for securities fraud, for money laundering, for conspiracy. With each pronouncement, Julian's face seemed to collapse further into itself. The Titan of Wall Street was gone, replaced by a common criminal. At the sentencing, the judge was merciless. Mr. Croft, he began, his voice laced with contempt. You have demonstrated a capacity for greed and a callous disregard for human decency that is staggering. You built an empire on lies. And you were willing to destroy lives to protect it, including the lives of those who loved and trusted you most. He sentenced Julian to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, a term that ensured he would be an old man, if he survived it. Upon his release, the gavel fell, a sound of absolute finality. The world Julian had known ceased to exist. He was stripped of his bespoke suit, his Patek Philippe watch, his identity. In their place were a drab orange jumpsuit and an inmate number. His new home was not a penthouse overlooking the city, but a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell. There was no one to charm, no one to intimidate. He was just another fallen man, haunted not by what he had done, but by the fact that his brilliant plan had failed. Far away in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Chloe Vance was refolding sweaters in a brightly lit boutique when she saw the cover of a magazine at the checkout counter. It was a picture of Era, looking strong and serene, walking out of the courthouse. The headline read, "The Titans Takedown, How a Wronged Wife Exposed Wall Street's Biggest Fraud." Chloe's hands began to shake. The $2 million that had been the key to her new life had been clawed back by the courts. The Swiss pregnancy had been a fantasy, terminated the moment Julian's accounts were frozen. She was left with nothing but public shame and the bitter, corrosive knowledge that she had never been loved. She had merely been used. A beautifully decorated cog in a machine of deceit. The life she had so desperately craved was now a prison of its own. A life of what-ifs and if-onlys in the town she had fought so hard to escape. 2 months after the trial, as the autumn leaves began to turn, Era gave birth to a healthy, beautiful son. In the quiet, sterile peace of the hospital room, holding the tiny, perfect child in her arms, she felt a wave of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. This child, this miracle, was not the product of a lie. He was the product of her own enduring hope. She looked into his deep blue eyes and knew with absolute certainty that he was the only thing that had ever been truly real. He was her truth. She named him Ethan. For the strength he had given her. For the endurance of her love. The divorce was finalized. A mere formality. The courts awarded her the entirety of the assets that the government hadn't seized, a fortune she would use to build. Not to flaunt. She sold the Park Avenue penthouse. That cold glass mausoleum of a life she no longer recognized. And never looked back. A year later. Life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. ERA had established the ERA Foundation. A formidable organization dedicated to providing legal and financial support to female artists and entrepreneurs who have been victims of fraud and exploitation. She wasn't just a benefactor. She was a mentor. She met with young women, listened to their stories, and armed them with the resources and the resolve to fight back. She had forged her pain into a shield for others. Her new home was a rambling, sun-drenched brownstone in a leafy Brooklyn neighborhood. It was filled with art, much of it by the women her foundation supported, the scent of baking from the kitchen. And the constant, joyful sound of her son's laughter. It was a home. Not a showroom. Serena was a fixture. The world's most doting aunt. Who believed Ethan's every gurgle was a sign of genius. One crisp fall afternoon. ERA was in the garden. Pushing a now toddling Ethan on a swing. His squeals of delight were the only music she needed. Her phone buzzed. It was a brief text from Anna Sharma. It contained only a news link. The headline read, "Disgraced financier Julian Croft's final appeal denied." ERA read the words. And a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. There was no jolt of triumph. No surge of vengeful satisfaction. There was only a quiet, profound sense of peace. The final door to her past had just been locked. And she felt nothing but relief. Julian Croft was a ghost. A character in a story about a woman she used to be. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned her full attention to her son. "Higher. Mama. Higher." He chirped. His face alight with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Higher it is. My love," she said, giving the swing another push, sending him soaring into the bright, clear sky. The sun warmed her face. The sound of her child's laughter filled the air. She had walked through the inferno of one life and emerged into the dawn of another. She was not a victim. Not a survivor. Not the woman from the viral video. She was ERA. A mother. A force for change. And she was, at long last, completely and utterly free. In the end, this was never a story about a cheating husband. It was a story about a woman's resilience. ERA Croft took the deepest betrayal imaginable and transformed it into her greatest strength. She proved that a person's worth is not defined by their partner or their wealth, but by their character and their courage to fight for the truth. She didn't just get revenge. She got justice. And in doing so, she built a new life. A better life. On her own terms. Her story is a powerful reminder that even when your world collapses, you have the power to rebuild it from the ashes. Stronger and more beautiful than before. If ERA's incredible story of strength and resilience inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more unforgettable true life dramas.